Great. So welcome back. It's been a long day, but a good one so far, and I think it will be even better after this hour. One of the things that we tried to do when we teamed up with Rich Reifel and Dan Bergstresser, who had started the Municipal Finance Conference, was to make sure that we remembered that the point of all this, at least from my point of view, is not to make more money for the municipal bond industry, but to improve public policy. It's an uphill battle, I know, but still. And so I'm really pleased to have Mayor Tim Keller on my left, who's the mayor of Albuquerque, and Levar Stoney, who's the mayor of Richmond, Virginia. A few words about each of these cities. Albuquerque is about 565,000 people, and it's growing. It's 38% white, non-Hispanic, and nearly 50% Hispanic. It's a very small black population. Both places have poverty rates about 16-20%, the norm. Both of them have the norm in America. Both of them have very low unemployment rates at the moment. Albuquerque, Tim Keller's budget is $1.4 billion, but that doesn't include the public schools or the water, which is handled separately. And some of the patches of Albuquerque, for historical reasons, are serviced by the county, like their little donut holes, he was telling me earlier. The city has 5,800 employees. Richmond is smaller, 225,000 people. It hasn't been growing. It's 45% black and 41% white, non-Hispanic. Mayor Stoney's budget is much bigger, $3 billion, because that includes the water system and the schools. You have an airport that's not in your budget, Mayor Stoney, right? And you have an airport that is in your budget.
And does bonding.
And does bonding, in case you want to do a little business while we're here. Richmond has 4,000 city employees, and of course the cost of living is different in the two parts of the country. So I want to introduce first Mayor Stoney and ask him a couple questions, and then Mayor Keller. Mayor Stoney was born on Long Island, but he grew up in Hampton Roads, Virginia. I hope I haven't caused you any political problems by acknowledging that.
Go Jets!
He was raised by he was raised by his grandfather, who was a high school school custodian, and his grandmother. I read, Mayor Stoney, that you were the first in your family to graduate from high school.
Yes.
Is that right? Wow. He went to James Madison University. He worked for Governor Mark Warner. He's been in Democratic politics in Virginia for most of his adult life. He was the Secretary of the State, or they call it the Secretary of the Commonwealth in Virginia. He was elected mayor of Richmond in 2016. He took office the next year at age 35, the youngest person ever to be mayor of Richmond. And he was reelected in 2020. But unlike Albuquerque, Richmond requires you're only allowed to serve 2 terms as mayor. So his term is up, and it's widely speculated he's thinking of running for governor of Virginia in 2025. I think both of you have nonpartisan elections, but both of you are Democrats, and Mayor Stoney is the president of the Democratic Mayors Association. So, Mayor Stoney, why did you decide that going from state government to be a mayor was a good move, if it was? And what do you find the most challenging about being a mayor like the city of Richmond?
Well, first, Dave, I got to say, first, thank you to the Brookings Institution for hosting this panel, but also I got a bone to pick with you as well. Richmond is growing. You said Richmond wasn't growing.
Population is growing?
Population is growing. You know,
Okay.
we're at roughly 230,000 now.
Okay. I stand corrected.
I always say this, right now, if you look at the recent census, Richmond, the Metro Richmond, and the city of Richmond is growing. Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, not growing. So we're the only metro that's growing. Okay.
Growing slowly, I'll say.
Growing slowly, correct. Well, that's just like the state as well. But anyway, I was formerly the Secretary of the Commonwealth. I served about 2.5 years in state government. Why did I choose to go to the state government, go from state government to local government? Well, at the end of the day, I spent a lot of my time as a resident of the city of Richmond. And I'm one of those folks who I'm going to have a comment or an opinion about where I live. And for many years, I had a complaint about with the trash being picked up? Why aren't the sidewalks paved? Why aren't the roads paved? And a friend of mine came to me and said, well, you have a lot to say about the city. You should consider running for mayor. And I said, for mayor? Why would I run for mayor? And it was like, well, either you're going to be in the arena where the decisions are made locally, or you're going to sit on the sidelines and complain and whine. And I chose to jump in the arena. And I'll admit, it is far more challenging than state government, because in state government, you know who's with you and who's against you. And normally you know that because of the jerseys they wear. Blue jersey, red jersey, right? You know who when you're whipping votes for a project or for a particular initiative, you know who to talk to first. But in local government, we're roughly all of the same party. A gradient of Democrat on my city council. It's a little bit harder to say this person's wearing that jersey, this person's wearing that jersey. So the challenges are everything is neighborhood by neighborhood, community by community, block by block. And that can be a little bit more difficult in a community that is 230,000 people, and people you see when you're dining, people you see when you're pumping the gas, people you see when you're in the grocery store. I think that's the challenging part about local government, is that you are amongst the people that you govern. In state government, you're just a little bit further away. You have a little bit distance between yourself and the 8.6 million people who live in the Commonwealth of Virginia versus the 230,000 people who live right there in your community.
It's interesting you say that. I before I came to Brookings, I was a newspaper reporter, and I've always told people that the difference between being a local newspaper reporter and working for a national paper is that you had to see the people you wrote about at the local government. You had a little bit more distance when you were national. Tim Keller is a native of Albuquerque. His father was the founder of a savings bank. His mother was a public school teacher. He went to Notre Dame, where he majored in art history. Go figure. Before going into public service, he spent 15 years doing a variety of things, the most interesting of which is for 3 years he was in Cambodia, where he ran a company called Digital Divide Data, which provided technology to landmine victims and survivors in Cambodia. It's now doing work in Vietnam and Tanzania. And then he got an MBA from Harvard, and with that great MBA from Harvard, he decided to go into public service. You can draw your own conclusions about that. He was in the state Senate, and then he was the state auditor from 2015 to 2017. He's been the mayor of Albuquerque since December 2017, and as I said, you're not term limited, so he's probably going to run for another term, and then we can talk later about his aspirations for higher office. You can draw your own conclusions after hearing him speak. But so you had two transitions. One, you went from the private sector to the public sector, and then you went from being at the state government level, both in the legislature and the executive branch, to being the mayor. Why? And the same question as I asked Mayor Stoney, what's the challenging part of that?
Sure. Well, thank you. All right. Well, listen, it's also it's an honor to be here. So I want to thank everyone for hosting both Mayor Stoney and I. And of course, ran into some of you this morning. I've never had so much finance. I can't remember what all these words mean that you're throwing around, pars and bits and coupons and everything. But I blame my former finance professor, who is Dan Bergstresser. So gonna have to review some of that. And I have to laugh too, because one of the reasons I ran for mayor was because of Mark Funkhauser, and I was an avid reader of Governing Magazine, so I really missed that one. But look, at the end of the day, the state legislature, actually, I think Levar really summed this up, but state government to me is, it's in New Mexico, it's also part-time, so it's only 2 months a year. So state government is like this very, sort of country pursuit where you take 2 months off and you go play state government. And then, you come back. And so when I was in the state Senate, that was its own unique thing, depending on your career and in what you sort of are interested in, that may or may not fit. And then as state auditor, I really loved the finance. I mean, I'll have to tell you, that was a really cool part of that job, and also being able to see every level of government, because that's what the auditor does in New Mexico, is they audit every level, so local and state and so forth. But I realized, especially in that role, Look, mayoring is a verb. I think that's also, something all mayors will tell you. There is nothing like being the mayor of your hometown or of your town in general. And for me, what I mean by that is it is as stressful as you can ever imagine, because it literally is my kids not at a grocery store. I'm in line. They're crying. They want snacks and treats. And like people are asking me about crime and homelessness. And I'm trying to just find like my credit card to pay and get out of there, But look, it is in your face. It actually reminds me, I think both of us played football, and there was a drill that we used to do in high school called Bull in the Ring, where you stand there and somebody calls out your name and you turn around and they tackle you. That's what every day is like being mayor. They just call your name, mayor, and you turn around, boom, and So
I was gonna say Oklahoma, more like it.
So that's right. That was the other name for that drill. But in there, right, inherent in that, I will just tell you, is deep fulfillment. This is a job where you go home every night exhausted, but also grateful for the opportunity. And because it is daily, that's the other thing. You wake up the next day and you've got a chance to do it all over again, better or worse, doesn't matter. You're doing it again. And that's very different than the cycles where you have sessions, on and off sessions. Mayor is it's just one session for your whole term. It never ends. It doesn't. I go to church, believe it or not, on Sundays. Boom. In the communion line, I will get hit up for issues. And so anyway, that's life as being mayor. But I think the fulfillment quotient, you can't beat it. And I will tell you, at least at the state and government level, it's a very unique thing that mayoring offers.
Can I say, Dave,
Please.
it's the hardest and the best job in the United States of America.
Yeah.
All right. This is a Municipal Finance Conference, so I feel obligated to ask you about the finances of your city. And what I'm interested in, we start with you, Mayor Stoney. So it's been kind of an interesting period. We had a pandemic. There's a lot of work from home. The federal government pumped a lot of money into state and local governments in anticipation of your revenues falling off. The revenues didn't fall off. So I'm curious, what's the state of play now? And particularly when you look at the possibility we might have a recession, how are you factoring into that budget as you do your budgets going forward?
Well, you're absolutely correct. We took precautions for a possible economic downturn during the pandemic. And so I remember in March of 2020, I had announced the most robust budget we had had to date, and then had to turn around maybe in February or maybe in a month later and say, we have to cut back on what I had announced for the July 1 start. And so I essentially, introduced a skinnier budget, I guess you can say. However, Richmond, our tax base is built on real estate taxes and not income taxes. And so we didn't see a real, we saw a loss in emissions taxes, sales taxes, things of that nature. But for the most part, we sort of stayed afloat. And then we saw federal money sort of arrive on our shores. And that supplement right there allowed us to do some things that we would never be able to do in terms of really relieving our capital improvement plans. Right, we have had plans to build this or build that and the other, community centers and gymnasiums, things of that nature for years and years and years. We were able to offload some of those projects by using the American Rescue Plan Act, some of the Infrastructure Act dollars as well. And so it's actually allowed us to be in a better position than we were. We've recovered compared to pre-pandemic levels. We've rebounded, and all the revenue streams, whether it's in the sales tax or the meals tax or the admissions tax, now the real estate tax, have all recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And what we saw was an increase in valuation and assessments at the local level as well. Like the Richmond market, the real estate market, it's warm. It's not as hot as it was in 2020, 2021, and 2022. But boy, it is very, very difficult to buy a home in Richmond because of the lack of supply. But the demand is through the roof. And what comes with a lot of demand? Rising assessment rates. And so we've created budgets over the last couple of fiscal years that have allowed for us to have surplus. We're talking $30, $40 million in surplus. And luckily, the city council has through legislation has said where those surpluses go after, once the budget books close, and they go to us being a more fiscally healthy city in terms of OPEB and things of that nature, which now, today, we are at the highest credit ratings we've ever been in almost probably 40 years. My goal is, before I leave in the next 18 months, to get us to a AAA, which would be historic for the city of Richmond.
What's happened to your payrolls? Did they shrink during the COVID, or they keep growing? Or
I made a commitment during COVID that I would not lay off or furlough any employees, and I didn't. Now, there were localities, cities in the Commonwealth that did. In Richmond, I did not furlough any employee. I didn't lay off any employees. What we did was we adopted a more liberal remote working plans for our residents.
so did
for
you
our
fill
workers.
the vacancies from attrition? Do you have more people today than you did before the pandemic?
We have
Or
less people than we had in the pandemic. So here's the thing. There's a little trick in municipal finance and budgeting as well, is that you keep these vacancies on your budget, right, that never get filled. And so I cut back on the vacancies. And so now we were roughly a workforce of 4,000 individuals when you include those vacancies. Now I cut it back to 3,200.
I see. Same question to you, Mayor Keller.
Some of the same, some maybe a little bit different. The pandemic was amazing for us financially. So I just want to let you know it was great. We just had so much federal funding coming in, and our tax base, it is, I think, all about like the mix of your revenue streams, right? We're heavy on sales tax, but we had just passed internet sales tax before the pandemic, and that saved us. And actually, the details of sort of the nexus of that tax, they actually had to go back and sort of tweak it differently because, we had massive windfalls because we're the largest city in a rural state. So a lot of the internal, like intra-state sellers are all in Albuquerque. And so we were catching sales tax coming in from out of state, but also sales tax going to rural cities outside of it. So that was great.
You're like a prophet.
And then, oh man, I'll take that. So now it's kind of the opposite, though. I will tell you now we're very much flat, lean, and thin. So the federal money dried up. Some of the rules around internet taxing by the state have been tweaked, which frankly did make it a lot fairer probably for the rest of the state. But we also had these vacancies, and this is, all mayors know this. This is the secret sauce to budgeting, is just unfilled vacancies. And of course, remember, if you don't cut that money, then you can just move it to whatever you want for one-time spending. So it's a great move. But what's happened with us, we had to use this for reoccurring pay. And it was the right thing to do. And it's something that I think that is coming to many government,
reoccurring pay.
Many government entities. We had to do a pay equity adjustment for our women employees. And at the end of the day, it cost us $40 million of reoccurring revenue. And it's about $20 million, that was to catch up, and then it's about 10 to 20 going forward. So we had to use the vacancy savings to basically pay women what they should have been paid in the first place. But we acknowledged that, we bit that bullet, it was in courts for a long time, and we actually made a conscious decision to say that now that we're doing good budgetarily, like we need to do this now, or else also a court is gonna do it for us. Now that has to do in some ways with our pay equity laws in New Mexico, but it was also, frankly, it was just sort of a value call on my part to say that we need to do this. But as a result, we are completely flat. We have very few fluff of any kind left, in addition to having to pay increases for police and fire for attention. So look, in our city, the demographics too, everyone is on a 20-year retirement plan. We're one of the few states left that have I think it's a defined benefit plan. So and it's 20 years to get it. And so basically now there's a bulge of everyone hitting 20 years and they're all leaving, especially in police and fire. So we pay them to stay. So they get a retention bonus, which we also fund with our unpaid vacancies. So those two factors have really driven essentially a flat budget for the last 2 years.
And so the level of employees in Albuquerque?
So it's down a little bit because of actually staffing shortages. So, we cannot hire bus drivers, refuse truck drivers. We're really having trouble because we brought Amazon into town, but they hired all our drivers, all our CDLs. So that's a huge problem with respect to like the bulk of the workforce. But we have it with architects and engineers. We have a lot of disparities in pay in private and public sector for professional jobs as well. So we're putting a lot in, like our salaries have increased drastically over my administration. And it's just to keep up with competition. But actually all of New Mexico has a big workforce challenge when it comes to being able to provide a workforce. So we're bumping up against those pressures that don't even allow us still to fill all the vacancies that we want to fill.
And David, can I add that we're doing so well now in Richmond that, I think that the cost, investing in the human capital of the workforce should be the cost of doing business. And a lot of our budgets across the country never recovered from the Great Recession, right? And so we saw police officers, we saw firefighters complain regularly that we are not back to where we were even during the Great Recession. So what I had committed to, I was like, you will see a pay plan adjustment from me during my tenure as mayor every year. And when the pandemic happened, I had to pull it back, and they were not happy. And it was a re-election year as well. However, I gave them double the next year, right? And now the police officers and the firefighters are the highest paid in my metro region. And recently, in the last 2 years, I've given a 13% increase in salaries for public employees as well. And we just also introduced collective bargaining as well.
Ooh, welcome to the team.
I know.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
I'm sure your successor's going to love you for all that.
exactly.
I said the dog that caught the bus.
So I want to ask you about 3 topics. I'll tell you what they are.
I want to add one quick thing.
Yeah, please.
Depending on which state you live, I think it's also to look at this preemption issue, and this is something that all the mayors are talking about. So when I was talking about sort of that tax nexus and where gross receipts tax, that's what we call it, is where sort of that nexus occurs. Look, the challenge is too, states are heavily tinkering with tax policy for cities all across the country. And you also see it in zoning and in housing. And you see it coming from both sides of the aisle, right? So there's sort of a Republican preemption agenda, but there's also, or a conservative one, I should say. And there's a progressive preemption agenda too. And this is where you see there's like D's and R's and then there's mayors. And they just want to run their city. And so we're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that whatever's good for one particular state department and so forth doesn't gut our police department. That is literally the debates that we're having because they don't look at it through that lens. They just look at the overall state picture. And in this case, they want to cut taxes because our state budget's high. So anyway, that's overlaying, I think, a lot of the budgeting issues.
Just to follow up, what do you mean? What are they doing in preemption that affects your ability to hire cops?
So what they'll say is we want to lower gross receipts tax, or for us, let's call it a sales tax. It's a sales tax that includes services, so that's why we call it gross receipts. So they'll see we want to lower that. Well, that's 80% of our revenue. So it's only 20% roughly of the states. So they can lower it and businesses are happy and it doesn't affect the state budget that much. But for us, it hugely affects us. And what's our largest single cost? Police and fire. So that's kind of, this is literally, I spent 2 months up in our roundhouse with all my old friends trying to explain this to them. And luckily it actually, sort of held true. But every year we're seeing these ideas happen where they disproportionately affect cities depending on your revenue mix.
Well, fortunately, Virginia has a non-interventionist governor, so you don't have to worry about that. Right?
Oh, the sarcasm.
So let's talk about housing. Both of you have mentioned housing. How much can you do as a mayor to deal with the housing demand not exceeding the supply? What can you do and what can't you do? Do you want to?
Housing, our cities, maybe to give you a visual, right? We're a Western city, so that also.
I heard that.
So you might have heard of Route 66 or something like that. So we're flat is the reason why I bring that up. We don't have a dense, area of town. We have a downtown. It's the most dense area in 1,000 square miles. And if you all saw it, you'd be like, it's a pretty small downtown. But it's smaller than Bethesda, to put it that way. So for us, we have a fundamental choice that is embedded in our zoning code. So I think the answer, I would start with your housing question, is like a lot of cities, right? We have much more demand than supply. So the question is, where does that supply come from? And in a Western city, it usually comes from sort of sprawl. That becomes a very difficult challenge for cities because of the stretching of public services, and especially for the education system and so forth. So we're trying to change our zoning laws to actually grow in, right? And so this just passed a month ago in Albuquerque, but we allowed casitas, which are our word for ADUs. We think we can add 10,000 units by allowing casitas for our grandparents and our adult children who won't leave. Because also as a Western city, right, we all have backyards, I mean, for the most part. So like you can pull this off. And then we're also converting on Route 66. We have all these rundown hotels. But under the zoning code, you can't convert them to apartments. It's actually about like ovens, literally, and sinks, and like how many you have to have and what is an oven and what's not. So this was super controversial. It was a 5-4 council vote, but we changed the zoning code to be able to change those much more easily, essentially without having to go, they're permissive now. And the last thing is the buildings that we do have, like our sort of skyscrapers, which for us like 5-6 stories tall, we can now convert those. We have plenty of commercial space downtown that's empty because after the pandemic, no one is working in offices like that. And we've got to convert those to apartments. And so for us, we've got a $30,000 or 30,000 unit, 20 to 30,000 unit housing deficit. The only way you can fix that for us is by changing literally the structure through zoning. It's too big, like building 100 unit supportive housing facility like that doesn't even scratch the surface, right, on a problem like that. So we'll see. This just passed a month ago, but it's the biggest change we've had in 30 years for housing.
Well, as I disputed at the top about how we're a growing city, when you go to Richmond today, there are cranes in the sky. By the way, only 100 miles away from DC. Catch it on a good day. It's an hour and 40 minutes down south, so you should check it out.
Richmond.
Yeah, visit Richmond. But as a growing city, the cat's out the bag for Richmond right now. We have people moving into Richmond who formerly reside in Washington, D.C., who formerly reside in Northern Virginia, and they found out that Richmond's a little bit more affordable. And heck, I can still work remotely from downtown Richmond, which now has increased. We've seen a 45% increase in population in our downtown since 2010. And so we got cranes in some of our fastest growing areas. I was just in an area yesterday where there were new apartments going up everywhere, and we just expanded what we do in terms of a business improvement district across the river to this actual neighborhood because of the growth. Here's the thing: when you're experiencing growth, the opposite of that is that the secret's out of the bag. People want to move in. Unfortunately, not enough supply. A lot of demand. And so we've been focusing on a couple of things. I'm a big believer in the abundance agenda, right? We want to create an abundance of quality homes, affordable homes for those who choose to live in the city of Richmond. And I believe in doing that, you have to do a couple things. Number one, you have to make an investment. And that's what we're doing. I just proposed a $50 million investment in affordable housing over the course of the next 5 years. So that's $10 million in affordable housing for the course of the next 5 years. Additionally, we looked at our zoning code. We're reversing some of the code that disallowed for, I guess you could say, the missing middle in certain neighborhoods. We are a city of single family homes, and we said we're going to look at adding ADUs, so we have an ordinance coming on that next week. But we're going to reverse some of the places that were industrial areas, that were places you couldn't build residential. Instead of this whole special use permit sort of approach, one by one-offs, we're going to actually do a full overlay of just rezoning some of these areas. Additionally, I'm a big believer that you got to get your permitting correct as well, because the quicker you can fix permitting and they can get these units to market, the more the city will make more money, and also people can find places to live. We were taking about 9 to sometimes 12 months it would take to get a building permit in Richmond, which was something I heard from the business community regularly. Mayor, why does it take so long to get a permit to build multifamily housing? We took it from 9 months now. It takes less than 2 weeks to get a permit, which now we see more. The reason we're seeing more cranes in the sky, because now folks are finding out there's not a premium to do business in the city of Richmond.
So this $50 million, $10 million a year for 5 years in affordable housing, what is that? Are you building it? Are you doing public-private partnerships?
Public-private partnerships where we essentially release a notice of funding availability. And we have developers, nonprofit developers, for-profit developers who apply for this funding. We used $20 million of the American Rescue Plan initially. to do this, and we've created more than 2,500 new affordable housing units in the city of Richmond. We're going to use $50 million to do the same and get hopefully 50 or 5,000 affordable housing units. Right now in the city of Richmond, I guess you would say in the metro region collectively, we have a 40,000 unit shortage. 40,000 unit shortage. So we know that we are just one part of the solution. We need the counties, Henrico County, Chesterfield County, Hanover County, to also focus on affordable housing as well.
Interesting. All right. The other thing, you mentioned this, Mayor Keller, that crime has been an issue in every city in America, yours included. How's this working out? What can you do about it? How much progress do you think you've made? What is the biggest challenge going forward?
Well, I want to lose sight of some big things like fentanyl, which is destroying America. There's that, and then there's also challenges around poverty, these underlying stressors, housing, things of this nature. But when you fast forward sort of up to sort of everyday public safety, Albuquerque's really leaned in hard on this notion of alternative response. So we actually took, so when you call 911, right, you get police or you get fire. We're all used to this. I think it was actually not that way until like the 60s when they added fire. And our belief, at least for Albuquerque, is that that is an inadequate emergency response for today's Albuquerque. So we actually created a cabinet level brand new department that is called the Community Safety Department, and it's social workers and it's trained professionals and service providers. But this isn't a pilot program. This is actually something that is literally part of the 911 dispatch system. So they decide what the appropriate use is for a particular resource, whether it's police, fire, or in our case, the ACS department. This department has taken now 60,000 calls that police and fire did not have to take. So behind this strategy for public safety, this is all about, for us, reducing the call volume burden into police. Right now, I mean, look, we had massive wait times when you would call 911 for a non-priority call. 5 hours, 4 hours. And, obviously no one in the community wants to have this, but it's because they're responding to priority 1 and 2 calls. And now these calls are going to this other department. So we see our response, we've shaved an hour off all our low priority response times because we're not sending officers to calls they shouldn't be going to in the first place. They're either not trained for it or what they are trained for is not needed in that situation. So whether it's mental health, behavioral health, down and out situations, medication issues, we're dispatching this alternative department. And their response times are roughly about 38 minutes. So also somebody shows up. So people are like, oh my gosh, somebody actually showed up. And so this is something that is, over time having ripple effects throughout public safety, but also throughout
So it's
health.
like the 911 operator is kind of a triage and decides which way to send the call?
They are. So they have like a decision tree, and it used to have 2 branches, right? They ask you those questions, and it's like police, fire. Well, first it's priority, then it's police or fire or both. Now it's priority, police, fire, in a 3rd branch, ACS. And it's
And what's the
all day. It's a $15 million budget.
what is
There's over
the
100
personnel
responders.
who are on the ACS?
So there's 100 responders. We hire mostly social workers or folks who've been through de-escalation training. We get a lot of sometimes folks who've been in and out of, not necessarily in prison, but they've worked in the incarceration industry, or they've worked in the public health industry. And the interesting thing about hiring for this, we cannot find enough people. We hire every graduate out of these programs that come in. And it's the one area where, like, as soon as we post it, it's filled. And we have a regular academy and so forth that we graduate them from.
So what about crime in Richmond? You had that terrible mass shooting on graduation day.
Yeah.
How much can you do about it? And do you think you're making progress?
Well, in Richmond, we're throwing the entire kitchen sink at the problem. Unfortunately, in Richmond for decades, I think we've had a gun violence problem. And for some reason, even though we don't have gun manufacturers based in the city of Richmond or even gun shops in the city of Richmond, guns find their way, unfortunately, into our lowest income areas. I wonder how that is the case. And so our approach to crime is twofold. We're going to be tough on crime, and we're going to be tough on the root causes of crime. When we be tough on crime, we're focused on investing in our police department. right now, as I stated earlier, now our police officers are the pay leaders in our metro region. But we've also seen a shortage in police officers. I am slated for sworn officers, 750 sworn officers in Richmond. Now we're at 600. And so how do you supplement that loss? How do you replace that loss? What we've been focusing on is more investment in technology. And so we are investing in what we call a real-time crime center. We won a grant for $750,000 where this real-time crime center will act as, I guess you could say, the air traffic control for our officers that are in the field. Last year, we saw a 34% decrease in homicides. Today, we have a 22% decrease in non-fatal shootings. We saw a 54% decrease in our hotspots in parts of our city, the East End of Richmond and South Richmond. Using data, I think we find we're able to solve cases faster. And also, using technology, we can leave the Miss Jacksons and the Miss Jenkins, who unfortunately are, I guess, held hostage in some of the neighborhoods, who have to be the eyewitnesses for some of these issues. When you have the eye in the sky, they don't have to play that role on the stand as a witness, and they can actually sleep better at night. We're going to also be tough on the root causes of crime as well. We talked about housing. I'm proud that in Richmond I've increased funding for public education by 50%. But also I believe that you have to invest in our youth at an earlier age, and that means in more after-school programming. Right now in Richmond, there's an after-school program. There's access to an after-school program for every elementary schooler, every middle schooler as well. But also we are funding organizations who are at the grassroots levels as well, who understand that there might be a child whose family may have experienced gun violence, and a child who lives in that type of family are more likely to actually follow through with gun violence themselves in the future.
So let me ask you each one more question before we turn to the audience. I want to leave time for that. It's no secret that our society is incredibly polarized. We live it every day in Washington, and it's only gotten worse. And I wonder whether you see the same polarization between left and right, Democrat and Republican, black and white, or Hispanic and white in your communities, and how serious a challenge is that? Do you want to start, Mayor Stoney?
Sure. I mean, polarization, I think, is pervasive, and it's everywhere. Richmond was the former capital of the Confederacy. And when you talk about a polarizing issue that I dealt with, it was in 2020 when I directed the administration to remove every single Confederate monument in the city of Richmond. And today we stand Confederate monument free. And there were some people who said that the world was going to cave in, that Richmond would never be a destination, and it's been the opposite. We've gained population, we've seen population growth, we've seen economic growth, we've seen cultural growth because of that move. However, there's going to be some people who are on the sidelines who say that it was the wrong thing to do. And what I'm seeing is, whether on the left or the right, that the inability to disagree, right? We all, Tim, we're not going to always disagree on everything. And I think that's okay. I think the way that we expect democracy to work is that, yeah, you may have your disagreements, I may have my disagreements, whether it's within my party or with the opposite across the aisle, but the way democracy is supposed to work is that we can get a room and we can actually hopefully churn out a compromise. Unfortunately, it's not working that way. And I think the polls on both sides, whether it's the far left or the far right, are the ones deciding the direction, or at least the message of both of the parties. And my belief is that there's a better way. In Virginia, we talk about what we call the Virginia way. Well, I think we can chart a better way. A better way to me is that we can get people in the room, and if you are unwilling to, you have disagreements, that we can agree to disagree, but we can find a solution that actually is for the greater good.
Do you think you've been able to do that in Richmond with your local?
Yes, I have. I feel like, city councils are tough to deal with, right? Because they are made up of individuals who come from neighborhoods, and you can have neighbors in their ears, homeowners associations, civic associations in their ears, and they can say, I'm stuck in this position, I cannot be moved. In my first term, I really ran into that. I ran into a city council that was unwilling to embrace development, unwilling to embrace growth. In my second term, though, I've gotten more economic development projects through the city council than any mayor before me. We just were able to approve a $2.4 billion project to build a new minor league baseball stadium anchor development in downtown, which is going to be huge for our city. In the past, we could never do that because people would say, remember 1975 when the city didn't make good on a deal that didn't work out well? And I'm like, I wasn't even around in 1975, but we're still talking about this. And so I was able to find a better way with the city council and get a unanimous approval of such a project.
I see. So is everything peaceful and harmonious in Albuquerque?
Oh, it's just utopian. I mean, there is no city council. There's no politicians. No. So, you know, we have, I mean, look, I think to maybe add some other flavors of this, because it is, I think, a universal issue, of course. But I think there's a couple of things. First off, you know, when I compare like the state legislature to even our city council and sort of the dialogue, there's increasing mismatches between sort of words people say and how they vote and how they act individually. So I'll give you an example. In the state legislature, the discourse was actually pretty civil and still is. There are decorum rules and things of this nature, and people don't attack each other in public. In private, man, you're really at each other's throat. In city government, it's like the opposite. You know, we're all nice to each other, but man, you put a mic in front of a councilor and they're coming for the mayor, you know. So that's sort of an odd dynamic that I think it's sort of like a distorted ripple of what we're seeing, right? Because what drives that? What drives you to be different in front of a microphone than you are like next to someone? Well, it's got to be things like social media and the need to stand up for X, Y, and Z because there's tweets flying around and things like that. And then the mics are off and it's like, oh, we're best friends again. It's like, what? Did you hear what you just said? You know, so that's been, I think, a really interesting dynamic that we're seeing now. I think, fortunately, a little bit like maybe Mayor Stoney, our voting is still actually all across the partisan board in a good way. I think we're actually having pretty good discussions, and we have outcomes that are not tied to the party, even though it's a nonpartisan, you know, council. Everyone knows what the votes are and stuff. And so even for the things I do, people don't really see partisan vote outcomes, which is like a third outlier. Whereas at the state, you know, you almost always saw partisan outcomes. In the end, even if you're nice on the microphone, you're still going to vote, you know, pretty much with your team. So anyway, that's just a little bit different way to kind of slice it. But I would also mention, I think there's something about like the cycle of accountability that's very different. Now, it's like on one hand, in the criminal justice system, it takes too long. So you see like criminal, like Levar Stoney was saying with technology, you get, like, we now arrest you when you commit a homicide. When you shoot someone, we will find you and arrest you because we invested in all this technology. We couldn't do that before. But the flip side is, like, on an individual basis, when there's disagreements, there's just no chance to actually prove out anything. So you might have 10 ideas, but they're wrong before you finish talking about them because you're the one who said them. And so that is definitely the case now, where like there is just no merit behind anything. It really is all about the messenger. And that's really unfortunate.
And can I add to echo what you said about, like, they're our friends in private, right? They want to hang out with you. They want to spend one-on-one time with you. But then you're like, hey, what was that all about? I heard you said that, I'm a lame duck or something like that. And they're like, oh, I didn't say that. You're like, well, someone said it. I mean, I swear I was watching the city council meeting and you said this about the administration. And they're like, I just did this for the cameras. Don't worry about it. I was like, wow, how can we, we're supposed to, the people, the residents want us to work together, right? They want us to come up with solutions. But I'll admit, it does become very difficult when they make you out to be the villain. And I realized after a while, there were some of my friends on city council who were like, oh, the city government. And I'm like, wait a minute, you are a part of the city government. But their residents respond really well to a populist message that I am your voice against City Hall. And I'm just like, wait a minute, you receive a check from City Hall as well. How is this the case? But once you go into their neighborhoods, once you go into their communities and realize that they can see that you have some support in their neighborhoods and in their districts, things sort of change after that. When they realize, oh, wait a minute, Miss So-and-so is supportive of the mayor as well, maybe I should work with the mayor instead of actually being a obstructionist.
Mm-hmm.
I can keep going, but Alex, you have a question? All right.
Alex, who holds the clock.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm the timing guy
timekeeper.
here.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Alex Connor. I'm a research assistant here at Brookings. I'd like to thank you both for coming and for a very lively discussion already. I'd like to direct this to Mayor Keller. So we know that the Colorado River is drying up very quickly, and that your state government and the other ones are sort of negotiating with the feds to try to, figure out how we're going to deal with this. So two-part question. One, has your your local government been involved in those negotiations, and how do you expect that, future lack of water resources in that area might affect your local budget there? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Pure researcher. I know, right? So, I do have to for my community. Our river's the Rio Grande, Colorado's Phoenix, but that's okay. The question is very relevant to both, and so it is a huge issue for us. They say there's some phrase about gold is worth fighting for, but water is worth dying for. It's that kind of issue in the desert. So for us, we're doing a couple things at the municipal level. Number one is controlling usage. So we now, there's all sorts of interesting technology, a lot of it actually from areas in the Middle East it's all about like drip irrigation. Some of these are pretty obvious, but it's a huge deal in the high desert because evaporation rates are so high. But we're also learning, we made some mistakes. Like we xeriscaped everyone's houses. We made rocks and gravel and cactus. And now our temperature went up like 6 degrees because we created a heat island effect and we lost our tree canopy. So now it's about planting the right trees that don't use a bunch of water, but that also provide shade. So we're planting 10,000 trees. Some of this is sort of very 1920s, trying to sort of rebuild a city that we accidentally destroyed when we were trying to save water. But the other one is we drink our river water now. So we used to drink water that was sort of stored below in the aquifer, and now that's our backup water, and we drink it and we reuse it. And so now most of our parks and everything is gray water. You might all know what that means. I remember when we first rolled that out, people were just appalled. Our parks are getting watered by our toilets. It's obviously much more complicated than that, and there's science involved. And so it's safe. I drink from the drinking fountain. It's all good. But I will tell you, we've really gotten past that in the West. 5 years ago, that was a concern. Now everyone agrees water is really important. So that's primarily sort of what we're doing on the city end. But when you think of the city, we're the largest water user in the state of New Mexico. So that's why reducing use is really, really important. And we have all the stats and everything on this, but we have recharged our aquifer. I think our usage, even in the last few years, is down like 22%. But it also is your shower heads that are all low flow, your toilets are low flow. There's a lot of sort of back-end technology that goes into everyday life. All your dishwasher, all of those things, all the appliances in our homes and our businesses are all adjusted to water consumption now.
Uh-oh.
Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Cadell. I work for Global Counsel, which is a public policy consulting firm here in DC. Thank you both for the presentation and a great lively discussion. My question is about the level of federal funding that has been passed in recent years. We have the American Recovery Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and now the IRA. And for us in DC, it's often hard to see how much of this has had an impact at the local level. Much of this is probably mediated by your respective states, but you've referred to some of the grants that you've received, and want to get a sense of how efficiently you feel that funding is being distributed, and then this is going to play out over many more years to come. So just want to get a sense of, and maybe some of this comes down to areas that you're not directly responsible for, such as schools, but from the areas that you see, how much of an impact has let's call it the post-COVID stimulus funding had?
Yes.
And then how much do you think it will have, say, over the next 5 years, maybe the remainder of your terms, or as far as you can
Mayor Stoney, you want to start? You
Recently
spoke
seen.
some
Thank
about
you.
this already, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't want to speak for all my fellow mayors, but we love the American Rescue Plan Act.
That's right. That's
All right, we love the American Rescue Plan. And let me tell you why we love the American Rescue Plan Act. Because compared to, I believe, the CARES Act, where if you were not a city above 500,000 people, you had to get your CARES Act dollars from the state. And if you are in a state where, let's say, the governors of the opposite party, that was probably a little bit more difficult to receive dollars for the local level and for your recovery. In Richmond, we received $155 million because we're an independent city. And so we don't have a county structure over top of us, I guess you can say. And so we received the county allocation and we received the city allocation. And on $155 million, we were able, like I said, offload some of those infrastructure projects onto the American Rescue Plan Act and off of our capital improvement plan and relieving some of our debt capacity as well. Now, for some of the other projects where we have to apply for whether it's the Infrastructure Act and things of that nature, some of the grants within the Inflation Reduction Act as well, it's a little bit more difficult. It's a little bit more time intensive for localities. But we have until, I think, 2026 to spend the ARPA dollars. A lot of times people were like, well, we're not, those at the federal level were like, we're not seeing anything from the ARPA dollars just yet. Why? Because when you have over 100 plus major cities at the same time trying to buy buses or try to buy the same thing from vendors, you're not going to see that right away. It's going to take a little time for the market to catch up with what the cities are requesting. And so hopefully, I think by 2026, after we've encumbered a number of these expenses, you're going to see some of these tangible projects come out of the ground. We are hoping that we will be able to cut ribbons on community centers that we're using the American Rescue Plan Act at the end of next year. Out of what we spent thus far, we spent probably a little bit more than a third thus far. And a lot of times what we've done is we've utilized the dollars from the federal government in terms of grants to small businesses, to nonprofits. Some of it's supplemented some of the work we've done with Parks and Recreation or what we're doing in human services. But obviously some of those dollars are starting to dry up. And then you're seeing some of our residents who are in need. A lot of the unfortunate COVID response is starting to expire and time out, and that's why you're seeing a need for some of our residents when it comes to evictions and things of that nature, or those who are depending upon.
But you have 2/3 of the money still to spend.
We still have 2/3 of the money still to spend. About $78 million of that was focused on
Capital. I see.
Yeah.
Mayor Keller?
So first, just want to reiterate, I mean, as mayors, we believe we're better at spending money than any other form of government. And I take personal pride in spending money in our community. I mean, in a sense that, look, we blew through our era money in 9 months. We've got dozens of little things that people care about, like drinking fountains in our parks again. We've got bathrooms in our parks. We have street lights in historically underserved communities of color that had no street lights, in a sense that they literally couldn't even be safe or drive safe. We have thousands of new street lights. We repaved roads all over in our low income and underserved neighborhoods. And we used it a lot for housing vouchers. So for a while, now those are sort of expiring, but for a while we had thousands of people being housed with housing vouchers. So our response was to spend it on what we could spend it on now. It was sort of the opposite, which was a lot of smaller stuff. And so we very much viewed it as sort of a quick New Deal-ish program where it was just gonna, no one was on the streets, literally, so we paved them all. That's kind of what we were doing. The 10,000 trees that we're planting, that was also what we used it for. Now, as great as that was, and of course we used it as a funding swap, by the way, so then we had surplus funding because we were going to spend our money on that anyway, right? But now we use that money to then pay for community centers and stuff that are sort of coming online. But we already met our federal obligation, and that money's all gone. So some good little finance in there, I think. Got to credit our CFO for that. Now, the challenge, though, I will tell you, look, this funding, I think for America, it's great. No mistake. And for cities, it's great. The problem is how long it's taking. Whether it's the supply chain challenges, or I will just tell you, I had a grant, which we're grateful for, from NMDOT for this amazing Highline project for us. It's called the Rail Trail. It's like a $100 million project, game changer for our city, transformational. And I've got this pluralism problem. I've got approvals from the state I have to get. I've got approvals from BNSF Railroad I have to get. I've got approvals from the county. I've got approvals from the flood control district. I got approvals from the Rio Grande Conservancy District. And I've got approvals from EPA. Then I've got it from NMDOT. And guess what? NMDOT, who gave us the money, just federalized the grant. I don't even know what that word means. I just found this out yesterday. But why are you federalizing something you just gave to us? Yes. So, I think to me, the sort of bureaucratic DC wake-up call is if you give us the money, get out of the way. Just help us through this cycle time problem. Because if you add 9 months of approval into all those layers, I don't even know. Who knows? He's going to be governor. I don't even know what's going to happen. All these projects, see you in 2030. That is the way this is being handled right now. And it's all our own fault. This isn't even a partisan problem. It's just it's the definition of sort of red tape is what is ruining this whole program.
Ditto.
Tim?
Hi, Tim Johnson from University of Illinois. Just echoing earlier session today, I'm just wondering if climate mitigation investment is on the horizon in either of your agendas, or if that's not at your level.
We started when I came in, and this is kind of funny because the opposite. Everyone would be we're going to be, 100% renewable by 2070. And this was we have all these criteria at different levels of government. It's so far away. So we decided we were going to try and pick things that we could do in the short term. So we committed to 100% solar as a government. So our sort of net electricity bill is zero. So for us, that's been a key focus. And for that, we're at 92%. I think we're third in a race. I know Seattle's slightly ahead of us. And it's a mix of all of these things. It's solar panels, but it's also sort of weatherization. There's a lot of that. We have a control system that monitors all the city buildings. I can crank up the heat in fire stations because it's all centralized, so you can optimize it. We don't do that, of course. But it's just one of the fun things you can do as mayor.
Poor guy has to go back. He has to go back to Albuquerque.
And where it's over 100 degrees. But we've done a lot of that to optimize. So there's that piece we're leaning heavily on. But the other piece is also around, of course, electrification of our fleet. So transitioning to electric buses, electric cars, all of this, but drastically slowed by the supply chain problems. And, and also by cost. Some of these technologies for utility vehicles are just extremely high. So on the one hand, I believe every city can be sort of net neutral on their energy expense, on their electricity expense. But on the other hand, we just have a long ways to go with respect to availability of the technology and cost of the technology to really tackle climate change. But we have all the plans. I think in general, American cities are in a great place when it comes to the plans to do it. It's just how fast we can do it.
And I agree with Tim on that one. We have all the plans. But sometimes, the dollars that we get from the federal government are going to run out. And so do we have a sustainable revenue stream to continue to implement the plan is what my worry is. And so we are doing things. What my focus has been on more on environmental justice in terms of there are black and brown areas or red line communities who just don't have trees, as Tim said. They have not received the sort of investment that I think is necessary for them to live, to see a lower cost in their electric bills and things of that nature. So that's been at the top of my priority list. It's how do we bring more trees? How do we bring more green space to areas that just haven't gotten in the past?
In the back?
Hey there, Emily Brock with the Government Finance Officers Association. I'm actually texting your CFOs as we speak how amazing you're doing. And maybe we can end this on a high note about how awesome
you didn't make
your
any
finance
commitments today. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I
your
heard
finance
your
officers
a really fun conference, by
are
the way.
fantastic people, truly. I was hoping to maybe get your thoughts though, because I can't help but also note that your finance officers are suffering from a dearth of talent. so that while maybe eliminating vacant roles is sort of a budget tool, it's actually a real concern for finance departments across the country, especially those managing municipal finance. Wondering if maybe you could comment on that and give us your thoughts on how we might be able to relieve that sort of a difficult human resource challenge we're currently presented with.
If you can work Chat GPT into your answer.
Well, I think it's necessary for me, that portfolio when it comes to finance, but also just the pillar agencies within my enterprise, technology, human resources, procurement, that has always been the challenge for a city like Richmond. That's been the challenge where we can never keep top tier talent in those departments. And so you see us falling behind other localities, particularly suburban localities for that. So I've been willing to, I guess you would say, pay the price for the top tier talent in technology, in HR, in procurement, because you're only as good as, you're only as strong as those departments are strong. Right? If you don't have a strong IT, if you don't have a strong HR department or a strong procurement department, you're going to have real problems. And I can give you some horror stories in the city of Richmond's past. I will not reveal my dirty laundry here, but these are issues that I ran on as mayor or as a candidate in 2016. And I'm glad that we've come to find some solutions because we've invested in the talent in these areas. And so sometimes, and here's the thing, when you pay an individual to come work for you, in terms of their salary, I think we have to see as municipal leaders and municipal executives that the cost of doing business is becoming more expensive. And some of that cost is paying top tier talent to come work with you. A lot of times we will say, you know what, let's go with the cheapest price on a CFO or a head of HR or procurement. And sometimes you get what you pay for. I tell mayors all the time who are coming in, you get what you pay for. And so spare that expense, make the investment, and get the top tier talent in the door.
I would just add a couple of things. One is I'm always jealous our staff comes back from your conference and they just love it. And, seriously, I've heard it's a great time. So just want to plug GFOA. Someday I'll make the cut to go there. So look, one, just on the investment side, I think our CFO, when I came in, was making 80 grand. And these are all public figures. Now I think our CFO is at 180. And so that's just a reflection that's the same for the staff. There was a gross under compensation for folks, especially in this area. But I want to add, I think a key, we're not the best at this, but I think a key for a lot of these positions, you've got to have career ladders in cities. We really lost this, and it's like, there's a little bit of a bump for seniority because that's part of what the benefit of being in government. You need that experience. That matters. You also need, if you get your CFE or you get all those other series of letters that you guys offer, you can get all these certifications, but that should come with a pay increase accordingly. And so creating a career ladder within profession bands, this is what police and fire are excellent at this. And that's why they stay their whole career, even if they're not promoted. They still find ways to advance and increase their compensation. We've got to do that across the professional industries as well. And that's something for us that's very new and we're just starting to work on.
Great. So please join me in thanking both Mayor Stoney and Mayor Keller. And thank you for the questions, and I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them. The good news is we have drinks outside now. I think they're in the room across the hall. And we're going to start early tomorrow at 8:30 with breakfast first around 8 or 8:15. So I hope to see at least some of you there tomorrow. You guys are excused. You don't have to come tomorrow. But you're welcome. Yeah. Thanks.